sins. Let me just be very clear about communion. Lining up and walking around for communion doesn't make it any more sacred than handing it out. Doing communion on first Sunday does not make it any more sacred than doing it on second Sunday. Holy Eucharist was a 7-course meal that Jews ate. The importance of communion is where your heart is when you take it. And if our hearts are on the act of communion and not on the gift of communion, you've missed communion. So where did it come from? Jesus is in the upper room with his disciples. He told his disciples to eat bread and drink wine. And if we're talking about the wine, I've told you this before, the reason that the artist painted that big thing in the Sistine Chapel and used red wine was to give dimension to the picture. Sangiovese was the wine of that community. It was white wine. So more than likely, Jesus had bread, unleavened bread, and white wine. We added a whole bunch of stuff to it, but the wines in that, because remember, wine was easier to drink because it didn't infect you as much as water did, because water was not filtered like our filtration systems. So you used wine to heat the water up, get all the stuff out of it, and then so they drank wine it was normal to drink wine as water. We ended up putting gluttony on that thing, but wine was normal. So remember the sacrifice Jesus was going to make. Jesus says in John 6, he's the bread of life. We are nourished to survive because of Jesus. He satisfies everything in us that's empty, John 6. Then what communion does, John chapter 6, is he brings us near to him to be fulfilled by him. So the early church, if you want to know when do we take communion, Acts chapter 2, verses 42 through 46, they took it every day. Every time they got together, they took communion. Every time they ate to drink, because here's what it was. They didn't sit down and drink bread and eat bread and drink wine. The reason they said that is because every time they ate, they did the one thing Jesus told them to do. Do it in remembrance of me. Don't forget me. Every time they ate, it didn't matter if it was fish and grits, it didn't matter if it was steak. Every time they ate, it was remembering God gave this to us. So here's some reasons to not do communion. Taking communion does not make you Christian. I want to back it up and say that again. Taking communion doesn't make you Christian. I'm going to say it again. Taking communion doesn't make you a better Christian either. Taking communion doesn't save your soul. Taking communion doesn't get you to heaven. And not taking communion doesn't send you to hell. I'm going to say that again. Not taking communion doesn't send you to hell. Not believing in Jesus sends you to hell. I'm going to be really clear about this. The only thing that sends you to hell is you saying no to Jesus. That sends you to hell. God warns us in 1 Corinthians 11 about taking communion without considering what it means and why we're doing it. The intent for us is not to mindlessly perform a ritual, but to set aside time to remember what Jesus has already done. Every time we eat bread, I don't care if it's here, if it's at Texas Roadhouse, if it's at Buttercup, if it's at Black Bear, whenever you break bread, thank you, Jesus. Whenever I drink wine, thank you, Jesus. Because it's a reminder that Jesus provides everything I need.